I was able to unsubscribe from all of these false beliefs that I held on to for many, many years that had driven me to a really bad place of burnout.
Even through, I would say, my young adulthood, I was seeking so much attention from men because I wasn't getting that at home. And so I had to grow through that.
There's a lot of high achieving women who have unresolved trauma, either capital T or lowercase t. And so trauma is not about the event itself, but it is about the imprint that it leaves in your system.
Today I have a really special guest. Her name is Gia Lacqua, and she's a renowned empowerment coach, an international motivational speaker, podcast host. She's also a children's book author, which I'm excited to talk about. She's got so many things going on, but in a really good way. She's a board officer, a leadership expert, and I'm just going to go through it real quickly, like what she does. So she is a coach, number one. She really helps empower women get through their personal reinvention, really focusing on holistic well-being and redefining success. And so this is exactly what this podcast is for. It's really trying to identify, who am I as a woman, and what is my role in the workplace and at home, and how do I show up as the best version of myself? So Gia, welcome to the show.
Oh, Marina, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to chat with you today.
Yeah, no, it's so good. And so you're tuning in from New York. We got quite a time gap, but I love that we can just have this authentic conversation on the internet and make it available to more women. I want to hear a little bit of your background. So could you give me like a 5-minute, how you got to where you are today, if you can? Yeah.
Yeah, the Cliff Notes version. So thank you for the wonderful introduction. And I guess I'll start by saying the titles that you just rattled off are very different than where I was 5 years ago. And so the titles that you just rattled off are titles that have been very intentionally designed as I sort of reevaluated my life. And so 5 years ago, if you had asked me about being a children's book author or a podcast host, I would have laughed in your face.
Right.
So I want to just say that, I've gone through my own process of reinvention. Specifically, I spent almost 20 years climbing that corporate ladder of success, only to find out that I was overwhelmed and unfulfilled, and had to go through my own process of kind of inner discovery, self-discovery, and I would say inner healing. And I was very fortunate to come out the other side having found my purpose, which is helping to empower high-achieving women to redefine success on their own terms. And I love the term that you use, which is unsubscribe, right? I was able to unsubscribe from all of these false beliefs that I held on to for many, many years that had driven me to a really bad place of burnout, mentally, physically, just completely depleted. And so, I used that as an opportunity as a catalyst, really, to sort of reinvent myself. I became a coach, and, now I work one-on-one with amazing women all over the world. And I'm also able to serve women's groups and networks in different settings, which is also amazing. So so helping other women who feel stuck, who feel in that place of, wanting to have it all or feeling like they have to do it all and really feeling disconnected from who they are at their core.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you've got a 7 and a 9-year-old, right now, I think. Yeah. So I've got the 9-year-old and a 4-year-old. So we're similar.
Yeah.
There. But so 5 years ago, they were 2 and 4, which is that's the zone where I think a lot of women really feel the overwhelm, because
Pressure.
5 and under is intense. Like, I didn't realize it until I got out of it, that I was like, oh my gosh, they're finally getting independent. I have a little bit of time left. But when they're in that phase, it is very, very challenging. It's a mind F, physically, emotionally, hormonally, like all these things are going on. Tell me how you kind of started to make that intentional transition. What did that look like? And what were some of the questions you were asking yourself?
Yeah, good question. And just before I answer that, I think what you said is really true and resonates with me. And I'm sure many of your listeners, that anytime we're in the thick of it, it's hard to see. It's hard to see clearly, right? Anytime we're in the midst of it, that's why that external perspective can also be so helpful. People can see things that you can't, because you can't see things clearly, and your goal is just to get through, right? And then once you're on the other side of it, the perspective is so different, right? Hindsight, it just looks so different. So I think what you said is really powerful and important. I just wanted to highlight that. Yeah, I think for me, it was like, is this it? The question was, is this it? Is this really what I've been striving for, working my butt off day and night for? Like, is this happiness? Is this success? Is this fulfillment? And that was really hard for me because I thought it was.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Based on the stories that I had told myself and messages that I had interpreted. I was working towards somebody else's definition of success. And it, dawned upon me that this was not working for me. And so I had to really do some soul searching and figure out like what wasn't working. I had to do an inventory and figure out what was working, what wasn't working. And there was a lot that wasn't working for me. So I was able to work with an amazing coach at the time and, really dig into some of those topics that can be scary to reflect on, especially the biggest part of it, I would say, and I also see this with my clients, is the identity shift. We become so ingrained in an identity, right? It could be a professional identity. It could be a familial identity. We become very, very wedded to it. And then it becomes very scary to step out of that. And so for me, that's where a lot of the work came from in terms of, figuring out who I wanted to be and what I wanted to be and recognizing the things that were driving me, right? My driving forces and sort of uncovering what those were and recognizing that they weren't all healthy.
Yeah, no, that's so good. And I can definitely identify with all of that. Like, I think in my 20s and even up until the last couple of years, my achievement was my identity. If I wasn't considered top of the top of my industry or just getting all those sky clients for no reason, like I really identified with that. That meant I wasn't good enough, but that wasn't happening. And it took really a faith journey for me to redefine what my identity was. And it came from what God told me I was, not from what the industry or what success or all these like multimillionaires were saying. And also I had to look for models and mentors that were actually moms that were like in it, doing it the way that I wanted to do it. And it was actually challenging to find, to be honest, because a lot of the people that were all successful, you never saw their home life. You never heard about their marriage. Like it was just this facade of perfection. And I hope and I think that the internet is starting to get a little bit more authentic, and especially Gen Z is seeing through all the BS. But it took time and it took intentionality to be like, actually, who is the woman I want to show up as? Because while this looks great over here, if their income is skyrocket and their business is doing whatsoever, but then their marriage is falling apart, and they're at the end of the day, they're like miserable. Like that is not success. You have to detach completely. Yeah.
Completely. And I think what you said is really important too. There's in the work that I do, I talk about the never enough phenomenon, which is this feeling of no matter how much I accomplish, no matter how much I achieve, it's never enough, right? Because that void is just going to we're going to keep trying to fill that void. And so till we figure out what the real core and the source of that is.
Hey ladies, real quick, if you are looking for a mentor, I just wanted to remind you that I offer mentorship to entrepreneurs. So if you're someone who has a never ending to-do list and you're spiraling out of control and feel like your business doesn't have a track plan, I want to work with you every single week for a month at a time. It's super simple, but I come from over 10 years of experience doing this myself, and now I'm willing to give that information back to people. So I've mentored real estate agents, I've mentored wedding photographers, I've mentored other business owners, and they've come from a place of overwhelm mostly, and they really just needed clarity and a couple of action steps to move the needle, and we've seen gigantic leaps and bounds in their business, like I can't even tell you. So if you're interested and you want to know what that looks like, I want you to go to marinatolentino.com. And there's a Calendly link there to do a 15-minute discovery call with me just to see if we're a good vibe check, to make sure we're on the same page. And I would love to work with you one-on-one to really boost your business to the next level. Let's dive back in.
Your point with social media and the comparison society that we live in, it's really hard to find the people that you want to connect with and you want to emulate and you want to be like. And I do like what you said about the generational aspect too. I think now, especially with podcasts like yours and mine, having people who are willing to share their stories, to be vulnerable, to be open, to be brave, and help others connect on an emotional level is so powerful. And so I think now people are willing to talk about the experiences they've been through, right? Whether it's professional, personal, whether it's trauma. And I think that can be incredibly healing and powerful for the person who's telling their story, but then for the people who are listening and can relate as well.
Yeah, good. So good. And I'm glad you brought up the word trauma because I did want to talk about that a little bit. So a lot of high achievers, myself included, are high achievers because we're trying to fill that gap that we didn't get when we were younger for some reason. Something makes us feel less than. So unfortunately, I'm a victim of sexual abuse as a child and had to really grow through that and learn a lot, tons of counseling. And then even through, I would say my young adulthood, I was seeking so much attention from men because I wasn't getting that at home. And so I had to grow through that. So talk to me a little bit about trauma and some of the themes you see with high achievers. How do we get through that if they haven't got through it yet?
Yeah. And thank you for sharing. It is something that I'm very passionate about, trauma in general, sexual abuse in particular. And I will say that there's a lot of high achieving women who have unresolved trauma, either capital T or lowercase t. And what I mean by that, capital T are the things that, the big traumas that you typically hear of and think about, like a rape, like a natural disaster, war. Right. But now we know that trauma is really anything that overwhelms our ability to cope, overwhelms our system. And so there's a lot of other things that are now considered, trauma, and that's the lowercase t, right? That could be things like being bullied as a child, that leaves a lasting imprint. And so trauma is not about the event itself, but it is about the imprint that it leaves in your system. And so a lot of us are walking around with what I call these invisible wounds. And they impact the way we see the world. They impact the way we think, the way we feel, the way we act. And so for a lot of us, we don't realize that some of that is driving our behavior. And this desire to sort of mend that wound or fill that void can really be one of those driving forces, like unhealthy, coping mechanisms. And so I became a trauma-informed coach because I saw it not only in myself, but a lot of the women that I had worked with, that underlying they would always come to me with a pain point, but of course there's always something deeper, right, underneath. And a lot of times it was, wounds that they had held on to from their childhood, that were really affecting how they were showing up. And I mean, really, quote unquote, successful, high performing, high achieving women, lawyers, doctors, so executives. And so it's really important that we're able to, I think awareness is the critical first step, is just recognizing that I have this wound that I either haven't repaired, or somebody said to me last week in one of my workshops, I thought I fixed it. Now I realize I hadn't, right? So maybe you slapped a Band-Aid on it and say, I'm good, right? And now you're realizing, might be bleeding still underneath that Band-Aid. And so I think the awareness is really just an important first step. And then reaching out and making sure you're getting the right level of support, working with, a trauma-informed coach, working with a therapist, somebody who specializes in what it is that you're looking for to help not only heal the past, but then figure out how to move forward.
I like that you brought that up. Yeah. And I will say, even though I feel like I've got past it, I've forgiven over and over and over, it is something sometimes you just have to keep rinse and repeating. And for me, like I'll notice I had an addiction to being busy and like that chaos addiction. And so I would notice like when I start to get all pent up and I'm like anxious and I'm like, just got to be doing something all the time. Like I would take a rest day and like literally could not rest. That's my warning sign to be like, wait a minute, what are we doing again? Like, why are we doing this thing? Why did we say yes to this project? And underneath it all, as much as we're grown women now, like there is a little girl inside still that still like rears her head every now and then and is like, I don't feel enough. I feel insecure about this area of my life. And she starts to pop up again. And you just got to like, okay, give yourself an internal hug. We're going to be okay. And what I'm doing right now, is that actually going to get me what I want? Because probably not. It's really just this like almost carnal need that comes out where you're like needing to do more to feel enough. But at the end of the day, I got to go back and remind myself. And that's why like I go back to my Bible. I'm like, who am I again? Because sometimes
why am I here? Right.
Yes, exactly.
It's a really great point. And I think it's true. We tend to forget right? And then we get caught up in all this other stuff. So, and I think a lot of women feel trapped in that cycle of the busyness and the chaos. And I think we finally realized like busyness, no, it's not a badge of honor. I think we've realized that, but I think a lot of women are like, okay, well, now what? Right now, what are we going to do about it? And so, feeling trapped in that cycle, I think is something so many women can relate to.
Yeah, for sure. And so for the woman who has realized like, okay, busyness is not a badge of honor anymore. I would like to go into more intentionality, but maybe they're in the career job still, right? They're working the corporate 9 to 5. Maybe it's 50, 60 hours a week. How are they supposed to actually unplug and be a present mom on the weekend? Like, what advice do you have for them when they're still on the reins of somebody else,
Yeah, it's a challenge. It's definitely a challenge. And there's a huge mindset shift. I think the thing that I focus on is sort of evaluating where you're spending your time and your energy, right? So if you are you have a job where you are outside of the home, you are earning money, that takes up a significant portion of our time. But I would say really evaluate what are your core values and how are you living them and where are you spending your time and energy and how does that align to the priorities that are in your life, right? Because what I found is that, things like family were important to me and my personal wellness were important to me, but I wasn't spending enough time with my family, my kids, and I wasn't taking care of myself. And so there's a term called cognitive dissonance, which is when our beliefs are incongruent with our actions. And I think so many of us are experiencing this. So sitting down and really taking inventory of how am I honoring my values and how am I prioritizing the things that I deem important? Because so many times, to your point, we're putting other people's needs ahead of our own, prioritizing someone else's, needs and not our own, right? And then we get pushed down, sometimes off the list altogether.
Yeah.
And so I think that is really important to look at where you're spending your time and energy and also the impact that you want to have. Like think about 12 months, 18 months, 5 years from now, what is the impact you want to have in the various aspects of your life? And are you setting yourself up to be quote unquote successful in those areas?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's when we all do our quarterly goal setting, you should have those personal goals too. And just constant check-in of like, oh, wait, last year I wanted this. Where am I at? Just a quick reflection. It doesn't have to take an hour, but just that little bit of intentionality goes so far. And as you were speaking, because I kind of have to put myself in the mindset of someone in the corporate world because I've been out of it for so long. But I think just the little things you can add with productivity of like taking an hour lunch and completely time blocking it off. Don't answer a freaking call during the lunch, like unplug so that you come back refreshed, or habit stacking, time blocking your own little blocks that's uninterrupted so that when your boss calls, sorry, I've got a meeting, but maybe that just means I'm working on myself at work. Like use your time to multitask there a little bit. I think that would go a big bunch. Hey, I'm sorry to interrupt, and I hope you're enjoying this episode of the Work Like a Mother podcast. Real quick, I just want to remind you guys, if you are worried about missing an episode, you don't have to worry anymore because we are creating a weekly email that's going to go out automatically every single time there's a brand new episode. And this email is going to have everything you need to know about this week's featured guest. It's going to have all of the links and the resources that we're going to talk about in this episode. So you don't have to go around and fumble through the show notes, but it's going to be served in your inbox every single week. So if you guys want that access, be sure to click below one time in the show notes today, sign up for that email, and then you'll never have to worry about it in the future. And bonus, if you really love this, we'd love it if you share this with a friend. Give us a review on whatever platform you're listening to, and we'll continue to bring new episodes and new information that's going to help you level up your life every single week. I want to ask you a little bit, your podcast. Tell me why women come to you. What are you talking about there? What are some of the common themes? And I'd love to promote that for you too.
Oh, thank you. So the podcast is called Your Future Starts Now, and it really is for the high achieving woman who is feeling stuck, right? But they don't know why, they don't know where to start, what to do. And so I have amazing guests like yourself on the show who talk about their experiences, both personally and professionally, whether it be through life transitions, whether it be through, trauma, or, other experiences that they've had, sharing sort of the lessons learned and their journey and their process. And so it's incredibly powerful in terms of those life lessons and takeaways from the listeners that come on the show. And I'm incredibly grateful for them. But yeah, I mean, the goal is to help women redefine success on their own terms so that they are not living for that external validation. They're not living to, achieve someone else's definition of success. And so it's really about, based on where I am, taking that audit of, am I happy?
Mhm.
Am I fulfilled? Am I content? Am I living my values? Am I aligned to my priorities? And being able to identify the areas where they're not, and then decide, how they want to move forward.
I love it. Yeah. Okay. Definitely got to dive into that. And just, I think the perspective shift, it'll be a good, like, weekly reminder of like, wait, are we on track? Are we not? Oh, yeah, I wanted to do that thing. So good. And then you're a children's book author. Like, tell me how that came to be. What is the book about?
Thank you. So, yeah, funny enough, I had somebody that I worked with probably for about 10 years. When I became a children's book author, I remember being on the phone with him and he said, it's funny, I've known you for so long. I never knew you wanted to be a children's book author.
Yeah.
And I said to him, you know what? I didn't either. It wasn't something, like I said, that if you had asked me 5 years ago, 10 years ago, I would have said was ever in the cards, ever in my plans. I mean, despite the fact that I didn't have personal strategy, I was never something I planned for. I will say what happened was, as I started seeing myself as a different person and sort of taking off the blinders that I had on for so long, I started sort of evolving out of my corporate role and my corporate identity and thinking about the impact I wanted to have in the world and the work that I was doing. The work that I was doing is meaningful. I did enjoy it. But the most impactful thing that I did in my corporate job was really help develop other people. And so that was definitely a calling for me. And so as I became a coach, it became very clear to me that there were a lot of life lessons that I had gone through in my healing journey that I felt like should be taught at an early age.
Yeah.
And for various reasons, maybe weren't. And so I have a series, it's 3 books, and they're really geared towards some of those life lessons. And I love that, a lot of people who have read and reviewed my books have commented that the lesson is not just for the child, but it's also for the adults who are reading it, because it's so true.
Yep.
So, one is about boundary setting, right? Which is something that I think is so important, especially for high achieving women. And I can't recall ever being taught how to set a boundary or, what is a boundary? What does that look like? And I said, this is something that's so important that, it really was something I felt called to do.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. And they can find those where? Are they on Amazon or how do they get them?
Yeah, so they are on Amazon and they're also on Barnes and Nobles.
Amazing. So good. I'm curious, how long did it take you from like idea concept to actually having the book in your hand and like in stores?
Yeah, I would say 9 months.
That's fast. Yeah.
For each book. Yeah.
Okay.
And it's hard. I mean, I always heard that writing a children's book is almost harder than writing an adult book because you have to be so selective. You're writing
Sure.
like a powerful message in fewer words. And I said, oh, that can't be true. I mean, I don't know yet because I'm still working on my adult book, but it was definitely a challenge, but I had so much fun doing it. Like, and I'm not artistic, but I am creative. And so I worked with an amazing artist who was able to kind of bring that vision to life.
That sounds fun. I love, yeah, the concept from words to actually a visual. That's amazing.
Yeah.
I'm just definitely going to look those up because I'm always looking for good books for the kids. I'm homeschooling both my kids right now. And so it's all about not only like the book smarts, but the emotional smarts too. So
Absolutely.
that'll be a good one.
And I think they're doing more about, the emotional intelligence now than at least there was when I was growing up. And mental health is much more in the forefront, and open, and people talk about it. But I still think there's a lot more we can do.
Yeah, but it's not at schools. It's something we got to do at home. So those are great ones to like keep by the bedside. Those are good.
Yep, absolutely.
I wanted to ask you, what's one piece of advice that can change a person's future perspective on their work-life achievement outlook? Like if you could talk to a woman right now that's like really in that struggle, what advice would you give her?
What advice would I give a woman that would change their perspective on their achievements?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it comes back to the impact you want to have in the world, right? I think it is important. I think the advice that I give any woman who feels that stuckness,
Yeah.
sometimes we get really mired down into the details. I like to say, look up. Now, for some people, that might be, and if you're religious or spiritual, that may have some sort of religious or spiritual connotation, but it doesn't have to.
Mhm.
It could also just mean look up in terms of taking that 30,000-foot view of, the big picture,
Yeah.
stepping out of the weeds and really seeing, what is the impact this is going to have, not just on me, but on other people, right? And then realizing that you have the power to, if not directly affect the outcome, at least influence the outcome,
Yeah, I
right?
would ditto that. That's so good.
Yeah. So I think it is like just sort of taking a step back and looking
Yeah.
at the bigger picture and saying, like, what does this really mean for me?
And I would even add to that, I always say you have to slow down before you can speed up.
Yeah.
And there's a cost to everything. So as much as we have opportunities offered us all the time, what is the cost of taking that opportunity is a really great evaluator. So
Definitely.
good. We'll end every episode with a fun rapid fire. So we'll just rip right through these. But what is your
Yeah.
Starbucks order?
My what?
Starbucks order.
Oh, definitely. I just go with the basic cappuccino.
Okay, you're easy. You
Yeah.
love Italy. Have you been to Italy?
Yes.
That's all. Okay, what do you make for dinner if it's last minute?
Last minute is usually a pasta dish. Throw some, it's like, I think I found it on TikTok. Throw some feta, garlic, and tomato in the oven and then whip up some pasta.
Yum. Yeah, that's great. What's your favorite go-to department of Target? And do you have a favorite designer?
Oh, well, definitely the makeup, health and beauty, I would say in Target is my go-to. I love like all the wellness products and
Yeah.
the new products that come out. I'm a sucker, so like whatever's new and popular is
Yeah.
in my cart.
And the fact that they have Ulta now inside Target is
Also,
dangerous.
yeah, it's
Yes.
amazing.
Yeah. Okay, give us a book or a podcast you'd recommend to our audience and why.
Yeah. So in addition to this one, which I love the title, by the way, Work Like a Mother is amazing. One book I highly, highly recommend is Essentialism by Greg McKeown. It's really about having that focus on what is important and that, if you're scattered and you're really focused on everything, then you're focused on nothing.
Yep, so true. Okay, I haven't actually read that one, so that's a good one to read. TikTok or Instagram?
Instagram.
Yeah. Okay. And then where can people find you most online? What do you want them to do from this episode?
Yeah. So speaking of Instagram, you can follow me at Gia Lacqua, and on LinkedIn, I'm Gia Lacqua. And I'm active on those two channels. And I would say one takeaway is try to identify like where you're feeling that tension, that dissonance, that stuckness. Try to get really curious with it. I think it's, we're always so busy and on the go that we don't take time not only for ourselves, but just to be. I think, I would say try to do less and be more. Even if that means taking 5 minutes or 10 minutes to yourself and just sitting in stillness and sitting in quiet, which is hard for us.
Yeah.
I wholeheartedly acknowledge and admit that. But sometimes that's where you could have the most impact when you really tune into that inner knowing and that intuition.
Yep. So good. Awesome. Well, we'll make sure that all of those links are in the show notes below so everybody can find those easily. Just a reminder, we have an email that goes out every single Tuesday, so you guys don't have to remember the notes. It keeps it so easy for you. But Gia, thank you so much for your time today. I'm really excited just to get this encouraging message out so they can discover you, listen to your podcast, get your books. It's going to be so good. So thank you for your time.
No, thanks for having me, Marina. I really enjoyed our conversation today. Thanks so much.
Okay, bye.
Take care.